Hello everyone, welcome to the part 1 of the 3-part series of handling React forms. Today we are going to create a simple form. So let me just make a folder here. And we would also make another folder, say part 1. In this I'm going to start a React project and I'm using create React app for that. So let me just log into my terminal and go for create React app simple form. So I'm going to do a simple form first, then a login form, and then a registration form. Each form more complex than the other. So ultimately a registration form would be something that would be used in a production level environment. So before doing that, let's go for the simple form. Let's wait for this to get downloaded. Meanwhile, let me just give you an overview on what are we targeting in this particular form. There'll just be one text box that will be there plus a submit button, and we would start with a functional component first, and then we'd decide on whether we need to make it a class component or not. Alright, so our simple form would be just one form that is a functional component, and then we'll decide whether a class component is necessary. So now by that it means that I hope that you know what components in React are. If you don't, then just let me know in the comment section so that I can have a video related to components later down. Alright, so let me just go into our form and start the project. And what is create React app and what are components and what is React? This project is not targeted to that discussion, but if you need that discussion, do let me know, guys. Alright, so let us just wait for our project to get started, and also let me open this project in our editor. Okay, I'll take that survey later. Let me see, I guess this would work, this size of fonts. Anyways, let us just wait for this to get started. And I'd try to follow a good project structure as much as possible so that you can straight away use the project structure in the production itself. Alright, so I have an src folder. In this src folder, I'll create a components folder, and this components folder would have another folder called simple form. Okay, and this simple form is our main component, so I'll create the component file over here. So simple form.component.js could be a good file name, though it is not necessary for us to create this naming convention or this folder structure in React. React actually allows us to create anything freely, or this create React app project does allow us to do that, but I want to make my folder structure organized. Simple form and a simple form component.js. I'll make a functional component in React, so I would have to import React from React and a function. I'll call it simple form. As convention, I'd pass in the props, and for now I'll just return a paragraph that says simple form works. Alright, so that, and I'll export this component itself. Alright, so just to be clear, the first letter of every component that you create of the identifier should be in capital. That is something that is necessary as far as React is concerned. So I have gone for first letter, that is S, to be capital. So I have created a very simple component over here that just gives you some message and exported that. Let me go into my app component, and the app.js is actually a root component in this particular case. So what I'll do is I'll just get rid of everything in the app component, and I would also get rid of this logo. I don't need the app CSS. This is a class component, remember, but I would also get rid of this. So just a div that calls in our simple form component. So we'd have to import our simple form component. So let's import it. So import simple form from components, simple form.component. We don't have to provide the JS extension because it's a JavaScript ecosystem. We don't have to do that. All right, so we call the simple form like so. So our component is called like an HTML tag here, and this is basically how we call a component. So your component is all done, and let us just check the output, and it says simple form works. Actually, it's a very zoomed in browser. So let me just reset the zoom. Simple form works. So that works, and let us now go ahead and get the rest of it done, where I'm trying to make a simple form UI first. So this whole form would just have one control, and I would also like to use Bootstrap in this particular case. So let me go into getbootstrap.com, and I'd get the CDN for now. That is one way of getting Bootstrap. Maybe in the second part I'd come up with a better way of going for it, but I'm not focusing more on the UI right now, and hence I'll just take the CDN link, copy it, and paste it in my public's index.html head portion. So this is one way you can get Bootstrap included. I would also like to, okay, before including Bootstrap, I'd like to do one thing just to make sure that Bootstrap is in. I would go into my index file, or maybe index.css, which is actually included in an index.js file. That is the very first file that runs. I would take away all the styling that is there inside the index.css. App.css is something that I don't even need, so I can just delete it. I would also delete the logo.svg. I don't need that. Anything that I don't need, I delete. So that is there. App.test.js not required right now, but I'll just keep it because this is a very important file. Later we may discuss this as well. We have the index.css cleared, and which means that your application now would be serif fonts. So instead of a paragraph, if I just go for an H1, for example, for now, I'll just get it really clearly that these are serif fonts that are working, right? Now, if I copy this CSS and I go into my index.html inside the public, where the whole file renders, this is the whole layout of that particular file. I take that link, paste it in the head portion, and as a result, I should see that now Bootstrap is kicking in. The fonts are now sans serif fonts. So this says us that Bootstrap is in now. Okay, so this is done. One way of getting Bootstrap into your project. There are several other ways. We'll discuss them later. Maybe later I might also come up with one other usage of another library called ReactJS. So let's wait for that. Not this particular video. All right. So app.js calls in the simple form. I don't think there is much in the app.js that we might need to do. Or wait, we can do this. I can go for, because it is Bootstrap, I can go for a class container. Now in React, when you're using JSX, you would say class name instead of class. That is what it is. And then I'd have 3 rows. One would be a header, one would be a footer, and one would be our feature, that is simple form. Or maybe I can just keep it simple for now. I'll just have 1 row, and in which there will be our form. That's it. So we would go for class name row and div class name call, and I'll put in the simple form in there, and I'd go for an H1 saying simple form. Okay, and an HR would also not do any harm. Let us just see. If I need an HR, I'll do an HR tag as well, but as of now, let's just keep that. So the simple form works. Now I would like to create a form in here, so let's go for a form, and let's have, because it is Bootstrap, I'd have a form group. So class name form group. Okay, and label control, let's say for form input, right? One ID that I want to have, that's it. So let us have form input, or maybe we can just say type anything. All right, and an input type text. We actually don't need to provide a type text. ID would be form input, and yeah, that might be it. And yes, class name is equal to form control. Now because this is JSX, you know that there is a class name property instead of class. Instead of this for, there is an HTML4 property. All right, so these are the two things that sets apart JSX from HTML. I'm not discussing what is JSX and all, but we'll just go for these two properties to be different while you are programming in React. Now we'd have a button which will be, say, submit. All right, it'll just say submit. So we'll have a class added as well. So the default is submit type, so we don't have to add any type. So btn submit, btn primary, sorry. All right, and say for example, if you're making this form for a task manager where the user wants to add the task and there's only one input that you want to go for, you can go for task. That'll be better. Add task, for example, and I'd also have the ID task, and instead of submit we can say add. All right, so that would be better. All right, so I have an add task form, that is fine. However, this is a bit long, so I'll go for call md4. All right, and I also have an HR. That'll look good. Okay, so let's have an HR tag. Yep, so this looks okay. This is what I want. And now what I want here is I want the add form to help me to type anything and click on the add button. When I click on the add button, whatever I have typed in should go into the console. That's what my whole aim is as far as this add form is concerned. So now from this particular form, how do we do that? We have a form tag, we have a button, and we have two ways we can do it. Either we can go for the on click of the button. On the click of this button, anything from the input gets taken into the console. That is one. And then there is another event that is on submit of the form. On submit is something that is semantically more correct than on click, so I'd go with on submit in this particular case. So I'd go for on submit, and here I'd be assigning a function handle submit. This is, remember, this is a function. There should be a function that does sound like this, that has this name handle submit. So what I'll do is I'll create a function. Inside my function is sort of a closure, handle submit, and I'll do a console.log inside handle submit. Later I'll think about, you know, getting this whole handle submit shown on the console. Let's see how this works actually. Now, as far as the coding is concerned, this is actually going to work because I have a submit button. On submit, I'm going for handle submit. All right, and on the handle submit, I'm just doing a console log inside handle submit. So this should work. One thing to note here is, if it would have been pure HTML, which it is not, it is JSX, what you would have done is on submit is equal to handle submit, something like this. So this is not HTML, this is JSX, that is React programming. We would be going for on submit in camel case, that is compulsory, and we'd be interpolating handle submit, the method. All right, so this is what we'd be doing, and this should work. Let us see whether it works or not. Because this simple form is called inside the app, the simple form would be shown anyway, so I don't need to now bother about app.js. My simple form is a functional component that I'm exporting on submit, which is calling the handle submit function. Let's see what happens. And I'm opening my console. So I click on add. You can see that for a while this comes in, but then the form gets submitted to itself. Now this is a normal HTML outcome. We have no action provided in the form tag, and hence the form is being submitted to itself. We might need to prevent that submit. So for that, we make use of the JavaScript event. That is the synthetic event, and that would also work in the case of React. When you go for any event, could be on click, on submit, on blur, on input, on change, any event that you may have a synthetic event passed automatically. So which means we can use that event to prevent default. This would prevent the default action of this particular submission. So basically it will not submit. So if I now go for add, you can see that inside handle submit is displayed. No form submission is done. The number of times I click on add, the number of times it gets displayed. All right. So that works. That's fine. I would like to go for this to be the value of input. And for a normal JavaScript programmer, I would like you to just think about what we are going to go for. If I want the input which has the ID task and I want the value of it, I can actually easily achieve that. All right. So in this case, I would do this thing like as a normal JavaScript program. If say for example, I don't know React, someone would do this: document dot get element by ID task, because there is an ID called task dot value, as straightforward as possible. However, this would be wrong. We'll see why, and we'll see how that happens. But as of now, let me just check whether this works or not. By the way, create React app. If I create a project with create React app, I don't need to refresh my browser. It automatically does the refreshing. So now if I go for test written in here, hit on add, you'd see that I'd get whatever I write inside my text box, which works. But then this is not what we'd be following eventually. Let's first make this form work, where I might have another span for error, and I might just have an ID for that, task error. So I have an ID task and I have an ID task error. So if that happens, I might just check inside the submit, like if the value is blank, then go for again the document dot get element by ID. Remember, this is not what we'll be doing eventually. This is very bad that I'm doing, but I'm just trying to simplify this. First, task error dot inner HTML is equal to task cannot be blank. All right, so this is fine. Else, what I do is I would do a console log. So console log document get element by ID value, and I would then get rid of this error as well. So inner HTML is equal to blank. Also, I would get rid of the value as well, because now the form should be reset. So this is a form reset that I'm doing. Value also could be blank, right? So remember, this is plain JavaScript. I might not want to do this for any React program whatsoever, but this is a working version of our form. So if I go for test and if I click on add, this goes. If I do not enter anything, click on add, it tells me task cannot be blank. But then if I just enter something and click on it again, this whole form works. This is what I want as a functionality, but this is not the way React would recommend us to do that. React would never recommend us to access the actual document object model directly. This is something that React does internally. And that is why we use React for. That is one, and that's why we don't have to access the actual DOM, but what we would be accessing is the virtual DOM. Now, there could be another discussion regarding what is an actual DOM and what is a virtual DOM, but I'll just brief you out on this. Like, React maintains a copy of the actual document object model. What we as developers do is we should only modify that copy, that is the virtual DOM, and we should never go for the actual document object model. That is something that React does internally. So what we do is we request React that, okay, this is the change that we want in the actual DOM, and then React would tell us that, okay, I'll change it when the time comes, when the time is right, and then it changes it. Now the changes that are done on the actual DOM are so optimized in their approach that your whole application works faster. It is actually better than any programmer can go for. So this is not something that we would be doing actually in React. We'd be manipulating the virtual DOM, and React would be syncing the virtual DOM with the actual DOM. Now, this is a brief of it. Now, there is a lot of more detail related to how a virtual DOM and actual DOM will interact and all. You can get all the details, if you just search on YouTube, you'd get it. If you want me to explain it, do let me know in the comment section. I'll explain it. But as of now, our main focus is to make this form work. So now, this is not what we'd be doing. All right. So what we would be doing instead is we would try to manipulate the virtual DOM. And for that, there is a feature in React components that is called state that we'll be using. And if I want my component to use state, I would have to convert this functional component to a class component, because a functional component would not be able to use or leverage the power of state. There are several reasons for it. So I would be converting this to a class component. So now what I'd be doing is component, and instead of function it will be a class. This props would go extends component, so that, and the function would be handle submit, and there'll be a render method which would return this form. All right. So this, and instead of handle submit, because now it's a member method that we are accessing, we'll be going for this dot handle submit. All right. So this is a functional component converted to a class component, and let us see if this works first. You can see that this works. It gives you the error. It works. All right. But again, this is not the actual way we are going to go for. Now, what we would be doing is we can actually define certain variables if we want to avoid the DOM interaction. So I try to get those variables defined for the task error first, those properties in here. So for that, I'd have to go for a constructor, props, and super props. This is the provision on usage of constructor. If you're overriding the parent's constructor, you would have to send in the properties to the parent's constructor. That is this line. All right. And in here, I can go for something like this dot task data is equal to blank. Or maybe if I just targeting the error first, I can go for this dot task error is equal to blank. All right. And what I can then do is I can replace, or I can actually interpolate this dot task error here. What this would do is it would take in any value from this task error, and it would just give me that value over here. So say for example, right now it doesn't show you anything, as you can see, but if I just type in like task cannot be blank here, all right, this dot task error is this, and then the render method happens automatically. You can see that I get this message over here. So that is the message that I'm eventually planning to have, but as of now I'll just go for it to be blank. All right, this. Now I believe now you would tell me, or now you would think of it like, instead of accessing the document which is something that we don't want to, we can simply go for this dot task error and hope that if the value is blank, the task error displays in our error section. Similarly, this HTML also goes this dot task error can be something that we can do. That's what we actually think can be done. All right, so I'll just keep it at the end. Okay, so this looks okay, because it looks logical as well, because if I go for handle submit, I can have this executed, and I can just go for this dot task error to be the task error, and as a result it should get displayed over here. So this seems logical. However, this should probably give me an error. Let us see. If I hit add without entering something, you see that this is giving me an error. What it says cannot set property task error of undefined on the simple form component.js line number 14, which is this one. It says that task error of undefined cannot be set. Now, how is that possible? Like, if in render method, we can access this over here, we can access this over here. Why doesn't handle submit do that for us? The reason is handle submit is not bound to the current object yet. So what we can do for binding is this dot handle submit is equal to this dot handle submit dot bind this. So basically we're binding handle submit to the current object and we are assigning that to the handle submit property itself. And hence now I'd be able to use this. So which means that error that was coming in, that would not come. However, whether it would get displayed over here is still a question. All right, so let us just see whether that works. So if I hit add without entering anything, you see that you don't get an error while the form also works, but the error somehow doesn't appear in here. But that doesn't mean that the variable is not working. The problem is, like when you reload your form or when you reload your page, when your component renders for the very first time, it takes in whatever there is inside this variable and it displays. So for the very first time, this variable is blank. After that, whatever you do, your render method doesn't execute again. All right. If you want the updated value of this variable to be displayed in here inside the span, you should have your render method get executed again, should be rendered again. But that doesn't happen in this particular case. And that's why the task cannot be blank doesn't actually work. So I would have to render this again. I would have to re-render the component somehow. Now there are a couple of ways to do it. First way, a very straightforward one, is going for something like this dot force update. Oops. This dot force update here, and I can also go for this dot force update here. What does this mean is I'm forcefully re-rendering the component. Not a good practice. We'd come to a better practice than this, but let's see whether this works or not. If I try to hit now add, you can see that this actually works, right? But yes, you can see that this doesn't go. So this force update, somehow it's not working as per expectation. But this is one way of doing it. Although not a good practice, we are actually forcing the forcing React to do something which React doesn't like. No one likes to be forced to do something, right? So that is not what we'll be doing. Instead, as I said, we'll be using something called state. And when the state changes, the component would re-render automatically. React would then decide on re-rendering the component as far as it seems whenever the situation is workable. All right. So what we would do instead of this is, instead of this task error being a property of the current component, I'd go for another property, that is state, which is a defined property already. This is coming from the parent, by the way. Even this render is coming from the parent. That's why it's not required to be bound, by the way. So that is another story. But this is already a defined property. This may have an object as its value, and it may have task error as one of its properties. And could be blank. Oops, not a semicolon. Right? Could be blank. So when this happens, I should be able to replace this dot task error with this dot state dot task error, because this dot state has a property called task error. And let us also verify that this works or not. Like test, for example, and they should show me test in here. So that works, that error works. So I'll just keep it blank. And now this seems pretty straightforward. If my rule, or if my statement is true, that whenever the state changes, the component re-renders automatically. If I do something like this dot state dot task error is equal to this, and this dot state dot task error is equal to blank, something like this. If my statement is true, that whenever the state changes, the component re-renders, this should actually work. Let's see whether it works or not. If I get a few warnings, by the way. Let's talk about that as well. But if I click on add, this doesn't work. All right. Now, what does it say is, do not mutate the state directly, use set state instead. Now, the mutation of the state, except for the controller, or except for the constructor, I'm sorry, cannot be done directly in any other function, be it render or any other function, what it is. So in that case, this is something that we request React, that okay, I want to set the state to something. So instead of doing this, I'll be doing this dot set state, and I'll be passing an object in between, like task error to be task cannot be blank. Once we do this, it's a guarantee that the component would re-render and display the error that we are giving it. And even here, we can go for something like this dot set state task error to be blank. And we are displaying this dot state dot task error over here. So accessing the state directly doesn't create any problem. It's mutating the state directly creates a problem. And for that, we use the set state function. And that would mutate the state of the component. All right. Let me just first check whether this works. So if I click on add, you see that it gives me task cannot be blank. And if I just do this, you can see that it gives me the display on the console and it gets rid of the error. So now you can see that the render is indeed executing multiple times. If I want to just check like console.log render, let's see if I go for this, you can see that first time the render gets executed, it renders the entire form. If I go for this, you can see that second time the render gets executed and this gets displayed. If I go for this, third time render gets executed after set state and the error goes. So this dot set state does the trick, re-renders the component automatically. Now you would also think that, okay, this is not necessary now, the ID over here, so I can get rid of the ID. And hence the error portion is now not dependent on the actual DOM. It is all the virtual DOM that it is. So this is one part of it, but still our whole program as a whole depends on the actual DOM, which we don't want to do, which we don't want to happen. So in that case, I'll try to have the same approach with task data to be blank at first. And instead of comparing the document.getElementById tasks value, we'll go for this dot task data to be blank. And we know that this is not a good thing to do, so we'll get rid of this. And I'd go for a set state again, so task data to be blank. So this is to reset your form. Okay, and in this console.log, I can just go for this dot task data. Oops, this dot state dot task data everywhere actually. This dot state dot task data. All right. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to follow the same approach that I followed for task error. I'm going for another property in my state, which is task data. I'm comparing it in the handle submit method. If it is blank, then show this error. If it is not blank, then log that in the console and then reset the form. All right. I'll get rid of this line as well. However, that might not work. So say for example, if I try to enter something in my form and hit on add, you'd see that it gives me task cannot be blank, and this text doesn't get displayed in here. So essentially it is generating the error all the time. It is actually quite meaningful because task data is blank all the time. It is not something that holds the value of the input. We might like to sync the data entered in the input and the value of the task data which we have. So in that case, what might be done is we can go for a change handler like we did for handle submit. We can go for something like on change this dot handle change. Right? So on change, that is the JavaScript event that we are going for, and we are assigning that to this dot handle change. So let's go for a handle change that may help us to sync the input and the data inside the task. So eventually we'll get this working. All right. So when we want a handle change method, first thing is to be binding this, because I'd be using this dot set state here. So this dot handle change is equal to this dot handle change dot bind this. All right. And we'll go for a handle change method. So handle change, I'd need this event over here, the synthetic event, and this event might have whatever I type in the input, and I can go for it in this way. So say for example, if I go for console.log, I believe if you have done JavaScript, you know that there is something called event.target. Event.target. Let's see what that gives us in the console. I might also get rid of this render because that might just take our attention. So let me just get rid of that console log. So console.log event.target. Whenever I change something in this input on change event. So if I go for this, you see that I get the whole input. And if I just want to get the value of this target, I simply go for e.target.value. That's it. So now if I try to type something, you can see that it gives me the value, right? Whatever that I type in. This can be used to do a set state with. So say for example, if I go for this dot set state, let me just get rid of this. Set state task data is equal to e dot target dot value. This would actually sync your input to whatever the data that your state has, so whatever the task data your state has. All right, so let us, and then this should work, because then we'll have the task data all the time, whatever there is in the input. So let us see what happens. So what we are doing as per our submit event is we are checking whether the task data is blank or not, which if I type in now, it will not be blank. If it is blank, then there'll be an error set. If it is not blank, the data would be logged in the console, and then the data and the error both would be set to blank. So I'm hoping that my form resets doing this. Let us see whether that happens or not. If I hit add, task cannot be blank, that is fine. If I type in something, say learn React forms, hit add, you see that the error goes, learn React form comes into the console, that is fine, but this doesn't go. The reason is that we have bound the property one way, like input on change is affecting the task data, but whenever the task data changes, which means say for example this particular line, it doesn't affect the input. So for that, I'd make use of the value attribute. That is the normal HTML attribute, and this will be this dot state dot task data. So basically we are binding the controls both ways now. If the input changes, the task data would be affected. If the task data changes, the input would be affected, right? So it's sort of a two-way binding that we are doing. All right, so now when this happens, if I hit add, task cannot be blank, if I go for, let's say something like test and hit add, everything works. And then we can also actually make it work more as a UI, better as a UI, that whenever I start typing, the error should go. If that is the case, now it is pretty simple. Whenever I start typing, this handle change is the one that is called. With the task data, I can also go for task error to be blank whenever the typing starts. So that will actually make it work better. So what happens is, if I go for this, task cannot be blank, and if I go for test, I start typing, the error goes, and that test displays in the console. Later, you can send this to, you can send this to a service, you can call an API and send this as a data, whatever you want to do, you can do. But this is a very basic form, letting you know what state in a component means and why is it used, and how to handle a pretty basic form with one input. Now, there are a couple of drawbacks in here, like whenever there are multiple inputs, this handle submit might be difficult, checking the validation. This handle change might be difficult. Let's say if you have a 5 input form, this handle change might be actually a very big method then. If you have multiple methods in this class, the binding might also be something that is hard to manage. So there are so many things that are lacking as far as this form is concerned, but the form is working as far as React way of doing things are, because we are not using the document object model, but we are trying to manipulate the virtual DOM somehow, and hence we are completely following what React suggests us to do. All right, so that is there, but still this form lacks something. So we would go into our next session or next video, that is the part 2 of the 3-part series, where I'd be going for a login form, and at that time I'd also introduce you to a utility called ReactStrap. It's a good library, and I'd also tell you another way of going for including Bootstrap in your React project. All right, so practice this once, see how it works for you. This will still work in any environment, in a production environment as well. The only thing is this will not be maintainable. So I hope that you got an idea on how the state helps us to manage the virtual DOM. Let's meet in the next video. Till then, bye-bye.